In this sixth lesson of the course A Critical History of Economic Theory and Policy, we spend a bit more time on the role played by Henry George in the final stage of development of political economy as a scientific discipline. Faculty positions were by this time beginning to change in the nation's major universities. The teaching of political economy at the University of Pennsylvania had, for example, been taken over by ardent protectionists under Professor Edmund James, who looked upon classical political economy as a closed circle, but one which had no line of advance. In essence, James was making the case that all that was worth knowing was already known. His role was to convey this knowledge to his students and not to speculate on questions beyond the scope of the discipline. Moral issues were best left to the moral philosophers. James unintentionally described an important strength of political economy. His description of the science as a closed circle comes close to its function as a closed system of analysis. In this system, land yields rent, labor yields wages, capital goods yield interest. This is the wealth fund from which private interests retain wages and interest, and ideally, society retains rent. Political economy is the science that describes the processes by which wealth is produced and distributed. There is no leakage. All wealth is accounted for. The line of advance referred to by James is the societal response to the moral issues raised by the science, but which, as professor of political economy, James had nothing to say. James went on to become president of Northwestern University, where he established a college of finance and commerce. Among the few reviews of Henry George's final work, there was at least one view expressed that George's ill health prevented him from completing the research required to support his thesis. Reviewing the science of political economy in the August 1898 issue of the Yale Review, Arthur Twining Hadley observed that while George criticizes his predecessors with no sparing hand, he lays himself open to the same kind of criticism in far greater measure. Hadley, who in the following year became president of Yale University, added that George began his career as a good preacher and ended a poor controversialist. Conditions around the world during Henry George's 2 decades of influence had changed considerably. At least it seemed so to many. Reformers embraced various forms of socialism, progressivism, social democracy, and the incremental expansion of the welfare state that came to be referred to in the United States as liberalism. George took the opportunity in the science of political economy to reflect on what his writing, lecturing, and campaigning had contributed to the progress of ideas. George wrote, "Though the scholastic political economy has been broken, it has not been, as I at the time I wrote Progress in Poverty anticipated, by some one of its professors taking up what I had pointed out, but a new and utterly incoherent political economy has taken its place in the schools." Thus, the professors of political economy, having the sanction and support of the schools, preferred and naturally preferred to unite their differences by giving what had before been insisted on as essential, and to teach what was an incomprehensible jargon to the ordinary man, under the assumption of teaching an occult science, which required a great study of what had been written by numerous learned professors all over the world, and a knowledge of foreign languages. So general is this scholastic utterance that it may now be said that the science of political economy, as founded by Adam Smith and taught authoritatively in 1880, has now been utterly abandoned, its teachings being referred to as teachings of the, quote, the classical school of political economy, now obsolete. The challenge of resurrecting political economy as a scientific discipline would be left to a later generation, as Henry George died before the Science of Political Economy was published. He was satisfied he had done all one person could do to change the course of history. A remembrance and evaluation of George's value to his fellow man appeared in the November 1897 Yale Review. The editors wrote, "Progress and Poverty was a great book. No other American work on economic subjects has had so wide an audience. No scientific work on these subjects has even momentarily approached it in popular interest. While Henry George is right to say that the distribution theories of his predecessors are rather chaotic, his own theory will not bear criticism so well as theirs. His axiom that whatever increase the efficiency of labor increases demand for land turns out, on examination, to be by no means an axiom and often to be the reverse of the truth." So, was Henry George really that wrong in his analysis, or was he too dangerous to allow his work to become the basis for what was taught in the universities? His seat at the table was denied to him and to others in the discipline who found his analysis convincing and supported by evidence in the real world. We reach the end of Lesson 6.